My name is Gail Colin. I am co-director of One Earth Conservation, along with Laura Kim Joyner. And One Earth is a founding member of the IAPP, the International Alliance for the Protection of Parrots. I also want to introduce Dusty. The little guy behind me is a 33-year-old cockatiel. He's been with our family for that long. We didn't know any better when we got him years ago. And I want to be clear that we are not advocating that you take your captive parrot and release it because the odds are good it would not survive, or rather he or she would not survive, but instead just learn how to take the best possible care of the bird you have. Also, don't buy a parrot in the future. If you're in a place where you can adopt, don't shop. Or consider getting a pet that might be more suitable, such as a dog or a cat that are domesticated and live happily in people's homes. The topic of our first panel is harm to people where parrots are harmed. I know that's quite a mouthful, but it covers a lot. I will serve as a facilitator of this panel, and I will introduce the rest of the panel as we go. Please paste any questions you have into the chat, and the panel will address some of them at the end of their presentations and also a discussion period. We are not allowing hands to be raised just because there are too many people for that. So first, just to give you a little summary of what this panel is about, we will be discussing the impact of harm to parrots, whether wild or captive, on all kinds of people. This can range from people who live with parrots in their homes to those who live with parrots in the bird's native habitats. It includes poachers and trappers, rescue and sanctuary workers, veterinarians, conservationists and researchers, government workers, animal welfare advocates, parrot guardians, zookeepers, children now and in generations to come, bird watchers, animal lovers, and probably many others I haven't mentioned. All harms to people that we'll be discussing are interconnected, whether they occur domestically or internationally, legally or illegally, in the wild or in captivity, in rural areas or in cities. It's extensive, pervasive, and extremely difficult to control. As co-director of One Earth Conservation, I have been a witness from afar of some of the most extreme harms to people you can imagine. Some of our partners working with us to protect wild parrots risk their lives on a daily basis to do this, sometimes really dangerous work. We had one partner in Guatemala who a few years ago was killed trying to protect a nest on his property. We've heard many stories of and been witness to corruption, legal and illegal extractive activities, violence, poverty, and limited access to healthcare and education in some of our project areas. And this doesn't include the traumas and difficulties faced by others, such as rescue and sanctuary workers and veterinarians. These are just some of the reasons why the IAPP and many others are seeking to stop all trade in parrots, which begins with the demand for these extremely charismatic and intelligent beings. It truly is a crisis at this point. So this panel features 4 amazing people from various walks of life, and I will introduce each panelist before they speak. Our first panelist is Irene-Rose Madindou, who is an ornithology research scientist with the National Museums of Kenya. Her research interests include the survival tactics of plants and animals in changing habitats and landscapes, and she has a special interest in African gray parrots. I am going to help Irene because of she has some internet issues, so I'm going to be sharing the screen for her.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for giving me a platform to say what I think about our parrots, the gray parrot, at least in our little corner here in Kenya. and how we feel about them, or how I feel about them, and maybe how we are almost giving up, if not for these small lifelines that we're getting from you. Next slide, please. I think you can see the photograph at the bottom, for me, bottom left. I'm standing on a crate, and there's a cage with parrots on top of beer crates. And this was due to a research grant that I got from the African Bird Club as a young research intern. And I wanted to find out about the trading parrots and what the community that lives around the forest, Kakamega Forest in Western Kenya, thought about the trade. And the top right, that's Kakamega Forest. And as you can see, all I had was a small, it wasn't a digital camera. I was just a starting intern. But I took a forest guard who loved birds and asked him to go with me up to the border of Kenya and Uganda just to try and see if we can see any parrots in any of these. And the people there thought that we were tourists going across, and we had to pose like that because if they knew that I am associated with a government institution, then I wouldn't have been allowed to even go around the hotel. And true to his word, we found these gray parrots at the back of the hotel. There were rats running in and out of these cages. They were given dry maize, and there was water which had some algae growing. And I just asked them, can I take a photo? And they said, yes, you can. But, look at the Hamtu parrots. First of all, we don't even know how many we have. We don't even know how many are being traded. We don't even know which ones are ours, because I was trying, even as a young research intern, to find out, are these ours or do these belong to DRC or Cameroon? One thing that we found out from the community was ignorance was being fanned so much so that there's lethargy in even finding out what belongs to us as a country. And this ignorance is leveled up even up to the government institutions, so that the kind of status in protection ranking that is given to animals or wildlife in Kenya for birds is very low. You come to Kenya, and even if you want to give us grants, the government would be like, give us money for elephants or the rhino or something. And if you talk about birds, they'd be like, birds? That's what white people come to see here. But no, we are also interested in birds and we want to look after them. Next slide. So now I wanted to talk about this Hamtu people. You can see the photos here are of people who are bird watching. This is elite, which means the local communities are not even in touch with the value of the wildlife that is within their reach. Which means if someone can just come from another country and say, by the way, we're looking for these birds and I'll pay you guys 75,000 Kenya shillings for each, they'll just catch them. I mean, it's of what benefit is it to them? It is of benefit to us. When we go to the forest, they say, oh yeah, it's because you're studying these birds, they're important to you, you should in fact pay us. But they don't know that they don't even know how much developmental psychology work is done using the gray parrot. Oh no, it's all that the Kenya people are caring about even right now is, can we eat? And which is the easiest thing to sell to get money to eat? And this is funded so much so that we are kept in a terrible state of ignorance. And so, education about our wildlife is left to those who are going to go to school, so that the local communities are simply left to these simple things like, we want a certain kind of monkey, and they don't even know if that monkey is valuable to this forest. No. It's all about money. And the worst thing is that the government institutions tasked with wildlife research and conservation, assign worth of wildlife to like what Kenya is famous for. It's just elephants and rhinos. So when you start talking birds, they say, oh, that's for West Africans. But that's like dampening even the research scientists' curiosity and love for what we want to do. I mean, not all of us can do rhinos, really. I don't even want to do research on rhinos. Some of us just want to do forest birds, but it's really dampened. And the research institutions that are even tasked to give the little funding money that's available for research, they don't put us at the top. They put us at the bottom. And so if there's something little left at the bottom, they'd be like, oh yeah, and let us know how that can bring money to the country. Does it have to bring money to the country? It can simply enlighten the upcoming generation about what belongs to their country. Below there is the forest guard who has since retired. He's called Wilberforce. He's taking a photo near the parrots. If anyone is able to, and you can enlarge that photograph, you can be able to see that I was even wondering, do these birds belong to Kenya? Because they were so pale on the sear. You can tell, there's something here that's, but who are you going to ask? And because I was a research intern, we have paper racism in this country. So if you don't have a PhD, you can't talk. You're not an authority. You're just a kid. So just mark your time. Let the elephant people who have PhDs talk. Then you can talk one day. Let's go to the next slide. I was going to say something very brief about this because I know someone else is going to talk about it. But it's just to say that this builds up on the ignorance that even those who have gone to school, even as ecologists, I think just go to school for the sake of it, but don't really connect what we study as the wildlife and their ecosystem roles. Like we wait to hear from other people outside our country, like these are ecosystem roles that your wildlife are playing in your country, and then we're like, oh yeah, oh really, oh okay, so which wildlife really plays huge ecosystem roles in the savannah? And then we're like, oh, it was said by this one. But I would like for us to take ownership, and so for me that's so frustrating. If I hadn't joined the PCC, by One Earth Conservation, I think I would have given up on parrots. I was just going to do my work on estuaries and just say, well, I mean, this is it, but is it worth it? Because I know what I want to do, and I'm pushing one of my colleagues now who's working with me on lovebirds, and I'm pushing her that you have to do a postgraduate study now on parrots. We have to get this out because now you have the PhD. As I'm still working on getting mine, now you have to voice this out. Someone has to stand for the bird. And for us, it's very, very tough because we have many more men in ecology than women. So we have even the gender racism to fight about, which is something we have to do daily. But for your voice to come up, I think we have to also hype up our research. And that's something we're trying to do even with our upcoming ornithologists, to put the birds, the parrots, or even the invertebrates, anything up on the same pedestal of conservation and research in this country. Let's go to the next slide. Now, this is what I was talking about, priorities. So anytime that we are talking about, like now there's a red listing going on and we're being told, work on your national red list. And some information was sent to the museum and it was on turtles. And we had to press for more information, like, didn't you have anything about birds? And they said, oh yeah, we had something about birds. And we're like, okay. And it was like the saddle-billed stork. And we're like, those are water birds. And I'm very well aware of that because I had the waterfall research unit. But I said, what about the forest birds? I mean, what's going on there? Like, I mean, we have the information, and then it occurred to me that if we don't press with this information hard enough past the national red lists, which is really a hurdle, and onto the international red lists, we're not going to be able to get the parrots, the lovebirds. You know, like now, Tanzania are very happy to have their birds, you know, being sold in Kenya. And we're like, I mean, okay, I mean, but there's range issues, there's hybridization, you know, like there's research, like what's your population status? Can we share notes? Can we talk about trade? I mean, I know you don't mind the trade, but we do. Somebody has to. We don't even know which ones are Kenyan. You know, like there's so much which I think needs to be strategized in terms of research and conservation and monitoring, which needs to tie in hand in hand. And really, the thing is to disciple more people. Like I've said, we have paper racism here and we have gender racism, and we're, I tell you, it's a fight that we have to fight every day. Like the weekend is for you to breathe, but after that, you wake up and you have to live to fight another day. And there are red tapes on how to do research, but I still believe that it can be done in a small way or in a big way. But one day the parrot must be free to fly free in its own territory. Whether there's money or not, we have to follow it up. I think that's what I heard for you. I could tell you very, very much. Thank you so much. This was a platform that right now so many of my colleagues really want, and they're going to join soon enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene. It's amazing what's going on in different places and different people, the challenges everyone faces. And that brings me to our next speaker. Hector Portillo is a wildlife biologist in Honduras and works for the local NGO there, INCEBIO. Hector is also on the board of One Earth Conservation, and he's deeply involved in our Apupani project in La Mosquitia, Honduras. Hector's presentation will be in Spanish, so if you need to use the translation function and captions, please be sure to turn that on. Hector, I turn it over to you.
Muchas gracias, Gail, y voy a tratar de expandir mi presentación. Y mi presentación es hablar un poco acerca de el riesgo que representa cuidar los recursos naturales y todas las especies, y en donde se incluyen nuestros amados loros que tanto luchamos por ellos. Igual que en la mayoría de los países, defender los recursos naturales es un riesgo, y esa defensa puede llevar a la muerte, ¿verdad? Y lo que quiero contar aquí es algo que pasa en nuestro país, y estoy seguro que se repite en cada país en donde nuestros grupos indígenas, campesinos y ambientalistas profesionales están luchando. Para comenzar, quiero mostrar nuestra primera mártir documentada, que fue asesinada en el año de 1995, defendiendo uno de los parques naturales de nuestro país, Punta Sal, que está en el Caribe de Honduras, defendiéndola en contra de la agresión de la palma africana, que quería tomar tierras que le pertenecían al parque para sembrar la palma africana. Ella fue nuestra primer mártir. Luego quiero mencionar a Carlos Escaleras, que era una persona, y esto fue asesinado en el 97, era una persona que luchaba y luchó contra aquellas personas que en su localidad querían de igual forma sembrar palma africana y hacer una fábrica de aceites a la orilla del río Tocoa, que es muy utilizado por las comunidades y esa lucha lo llevó a perder su vida. Carlos Luna, en 1998, fue otro defensor de los bosques de Olancho, que es esto que estoy señalando, el departamento. Él vivía en esta zona de acá, y Olancho es el departamento más grande y donde se encuentran bosques de pino y bosques latifoliados más grandes de Honduras. Y por defender el buen manejo de los bosques, también fue asesinado, y aún él perteneciendo a la municipalidad, que es como el órgano que gobierna el departamento. Lo conocían, y aún así fue asesinado. No les importó, ¿no? A las personas que estaban detrás de este asesinato, que eran extractores de madera. Y luego quiero llevarlos a la región de la Mosquitia. La Mosquitia es donde estoy señalando básicamente esta parte de Honduras, que es verde. La Mosquitia es el territorio más grande con bosques continuos. Es de los 5 bosques más grandes de Mesoamérica, compartido con Nicaragua. Existen diferentes grupos indígenas, dentro de los cuales puedo mencionar el grupo Misquito, que es con el cual nosotros estamos trabajando. El grupo Misquito es un grupo originario, que lucha desde hace más de 30 años por su territorio, y tenemos territorios que están siendo agredidos por colonos, por terceros que llegan a despojarles de sus tierras, y por la desventaja que tienen ellos, pues como hay ingobernabilidad, no hay presencia de las instituciones de gobierno históricamente, entonces es más fácil poderlos desplazar, quitarles su tierra y perder sus recursos. Muy exclusivamente quiero hablar de Tomás Manzanares. En el año 2009, él es un defensor de su gente, de su pueblo, de su tierra, de sus especies. Él está muy relacionado con la conservación de la guara roja en la Mosquitia hondureña. Él fue agredido, él fue atentado, y le dispararon 4 veces en su cuerpo, y le produjeron heridas que pueden ser visibles aquí en la parte de arriba. Y lo interesante de todo esto es donde estamos nosotros, es el proyecto, el sitio donde está nuestro proyecto Apupauni. 10 años después, Tomás pues hace llamados para seguir conservando y protegiendo las especies, las guaras, los loros, los pericos en la Mosquitia. Recuerdo que eso fue en el 2009, y Tomás para febrero del 2010 andaba herido, caminando con todas sus heridas y con toda la molestia que él tenía, siguió, y él sobrevivió a ese atentado y sigue luchando por la conservación de su territorio y también de las guaras, y los loros y los pericos. De nuevo, en la Mosquitia hondureña, un técnico, un ingeniero forestal que denunció la deforestación para sembrar palma africana y para extraer caoba y para también traficar con guaras, loras y pericos, asesinatos de jaguares, fue asesinado el ingeniero Alexander González en la zona de él fue asesinado fuera de la biosfera, pero los motivos era porque él estaba defendiendo la biosfera del río Plátano, que es patrimonio mundial y que también es parte de los territorios indígenas de la Mosquitia. Nuestro caso icónico de Berta Cáceres era una mujer originaria del grupo indígena Lenca, que se opuso a la construcción de represas en los ríos de esa zona, y que la llevaron a perder la vida, aún sabiendo que era una mujer muy importante en la defensa de los recursos, muy conocida, premio Goldman. Fue asesinada, ¿verdad? Por personas que tienen un poder económico fuerte. Todavía no se han agarrado, no se han capturado los actores intelectuales del asesinato, sí a los materiales. Y En Honduras han habido, de acuerdo a los datos de Crime Insight, aproximadamente 149 homicidios y creo que más al 2023. Entonces, la defensa del territorio, la defensa de los recursos, la defensa del tráfico ilegal de especies, de madera, de pieles, de citácidos, que es lo que más se trafica en el país, puede llevar a la muerte. Y aquí tenemos un caso, el año 2023, el coordinador de nuestro proyecto, Apu Pauni, fue atentado cuando se movilizaba en el vehículo hacia un sector de la Mosquitia, y afortunadamente no sufrió heridas, ¿verdad? El motor del vehículo detuvo los disparos que le hicieron y ellos salieron intactos, ¿verdad? Entonces fue otro atentado. Y el reciente, el de Juan López, un defensor del Parque Nacional Carlos Escaleras o Botaderos, que fue asesinado hace exactamente un mes atrás por la defensa de los recursos naturales, por evitar que se instalara una empresa minera de óxido de hierro en su zona y que iba a dañar todas lo que son las cuencas hidrográficas en el territorio del parque. Esta es la zona de Guapinol, donde no solo él fue asesinado, hay entre 6 a 10 personas que han sido asesinadas en la defensa de estos recursos. Creo que en la Mosquitia, volviendo un poco a la Mosquitia hondureña, la Mosquitia actualmente está bajo una gran amenaza porque hay una orden de ordenamiento de los territorios y los acaparadores de tierra están queriendo adelantarse y acaparar tierra independientemente de cuál sea el costo, asesinando o no asesinando, para poder establecerse antes de que empiece a regularizar la tierra. Y aquí vemos personas organizadas también pidiendo justicia, ¿verdad? Pidiendo justicia por todas estas personas que han sido asesinadas en la defensa de los recursos naturales. Se le ha reclamado al gobierno y se le ha dicho que lo que se está haciendo actualmente no es suficiente, no basta con lo que se está tratando de hacer, ¿verdad? Se necesita mejores políticas, mejor presupuesto para acompañar estos líderes que están en peligro, especialmente aquellos que están involucrados directamente con la defensa de los recursos naturales. Y con esto, pues, quiero terminar. Y sabemos que América Latina tiene héroes ambientales que están luchando por la defensa de los recursos para el futuro de nuestros hijos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Hector. As I said, Hector is part of our One Earth Conservation team, and therefore what he just spoke about is very personal to me and Laura Kim. May nobody else lose their life defending other beings on our planet. We'll move on now to a different kind of trauma. Our next presenter is Janet Trumbule. She's the Executive Director of Administration at the Oasis Sanctuary Foundation in Arizona, which provides safe, stable, and nurturing lifelong sanctuary for displaced and exploited parrots. Go ahead, Janet.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Janet, and I am with the Oasis Sanctuary located in Benson, Arizona, in the United States. We are a life care facility currently caring for just over 800 parrots that have come from the pet trade and often from seizures that occur at the international border of smuggled birds. So we do have quite a significant population of those birds in our care. And although my experience is mainly with U.S. Rescues and sanctuaries, I have no doubt that what I'm going to talk about, and I've heard some of this with our speakers, that we see these issues with the people who care for these birds internationally. I'm sorry, my screen got moved to another computer, so I'm trying to readjust here. So we really don't know the number of parrots in captivity. You know, there's lots of published numbers, and in reality, the parrots that we do have numbers on most likely don't encompass every parrot in every captive situation. So when you look at these numbers, you know, it's kind of hard to judge where we really stand, but it is evident by the populations we see in rescues and sanctuaries, the numbers of birds that come out of homes, whether relinquished or removed. We know an overpopulation exists. But sadly, breeding and in captivity and extraction of parrots from the wild for the pet trade continues and filters into the pet trade and affecting these numbers. As a 27-year-old organization, we've provided sanctuary to breeders, pets, wild-caught parrots that entered the states prior to the 1992 Wild Bird Conservation Act. Many of these wild-caught birds are still alive and living with us today, now 32 years later. So what will happen in the next 32 years to the chicks and the smuggled birds currently being supplied to the pet trade? There are certainly good homes and wonderful guardians of these parrots doing the right things for them, but there's just not enough. And many parrots are left to languish in closets and basements and neglected and left to die. Even the dedicated, loving owners often find themselves in need of placing their birds, or they pass away and those birds need a home. Our successors will continue to struggle to care for the millions of birds in the pet trade and being fed currently into the trade today. Our care staff carry an enormous burden picking up the pieces of uneducated pet owners buying from breeders and pet stores, flea markets, and on street corners. It can be very discouraging to us to think our work must continue for many, many years to come. So why do we do this work? Most of us start because we love parrots. We have a passion for these animals. And most of us have probably had a rescue parrot in our lives that led us down this path. And we know the huge need with very few people willing to do this work. We are strong and willing to give up and not give up on these parrots. We're empathetic and committed to making a difference, and we need to continue fighting for them. In hindsight, most of us probably wouldn't change our path, but fear our ability to sustain going forward. So relinquishment to sanctuaries and rescues, when we were founded in the 90s, was relatively manageable, with most challenging cases being addressed by sanctuaries like the Oasis. But over the years, those numbers have grown tremendously and we're flooded with constant requests. This is just a post from one of my sanctuary friends here that these are the things we feel. We get a deluge of requests from individuals needing help with their parrots or just giving up on their parrots, and they find contacting a rescue is just the easiest thing to do. Oasis receives more than 1,200 requests a year. Sometimes some years we've hit over 1,500 requests to help annually. So that's a huge number of birds to try and find a place for. And we are all at capacity. We all have zero space remaining. We have very limited resources. Our funding resources are small, staff and volunteers are difficult to find or keep, and most of us can't offer to help the majority of the parrots in need. So this often causes us to feel very helpless and carry a lot of guilt because we just can't always offer that help. Networking among ourselves as rescues and sanctuaries does help. We often can find room for parrots that need a place. But with the current state, that's just becoming more and more difficult. Sorry, my slide isn't moving. So to support the numbers of parrots in need, many of us have had to build multi-million-dollar buildings and staff to support the parrots that continue to fill our facilities. Most founders or directors are trying to manage these huge projects while balancing the need of the parrots, the need of their volunteers and their staffs, handling all the administrative tasks, and of course, the rescues handling adoptions. So it's a very heavy load that we carry, and our priority is always the parrots, and sometimes other things get put to the side, but with the numbers we deal with, I have 9 people caring for 800 parrots. So that is our day. We care for the parrots. Everything else has to happen around that. It's a huge load to carry. Our fundraising efforts to support these parrots is huge and never ending. Their needs never end. And there are just inadequate resources of funding for facilities to provide stimulating social environments for these animals, for their specific diets, their intense medical needs, and then the day-to-day care of supplies and staffing and other things like that. So the needs are many. So I want to tell a story, a bird story, because of the impact it does have to caregivers and guardians of parrots. BJ was a bird that came to the Oasis in 1999. He was a wild-caught parrot and kept in a cage for 17 years on the back porch of a home in Phoenix, Arizona. So in the heat of summer, he was trapped in this small cage. He was significantly malnourished and starved. He had leg and spine deformities that caused difficulties walking, and he could not perch. He was rescued by a couple who had to cut the cage away from him to get him out of that environment. He did integrate into our flock and did pretty well, but he refused most human interaction and really had little trust for the people who cared for him. So these types of rescues happen regularly. Not all rescues are this traumatic. BJ was a severe self-mutilator. And so working through those situations, managing those cases, bringing these birds back to health, bringing them back to a point where they are actually thriving and have some life in their eyes is very difficult, very time consuming, and an effort we all take on often. But these things can lead to a lot of emotional trauma and stress in our day-to-day work. So caregivers or guardians can experience both emotional and physical trauma. We are committed and work 24/7, 365 days a year without break. We experience trauma caused to dealing with the animals that have suffered emotional damage and trauma. As with BJ, often we see birds come in that really have no will to live. We're dealing with those types of wounds that they inflict on themselves as when they're found in those horrible situations. It can be very heart-wrenching, and it does occur more often than we like to admit. Even less traumatized parrots that come to us come with baggage. We see lots of behavioral issues that we have to manage every day. On our little islands, in our little rescues, it can just be daunting and very overwhelming to manage these things. But keeping in mind that we have others around the world dealing with the same issues feeling the same things that we feel every day, does help us to keep going. We know that we're not the only one trying to make this happen. And having these alliances certainly makes a big difference, so we can share those experiences with each other. So another thing that we deal with, we all want to work with parrots, but in our world, we have to work with people very closely. These people that request help for their parrots are often very emotional, very high strung, can be very threatening or demanding. We're dealing with individuals who suffer their own hardships with medical issues, loss of loved ones, hoarders and abusers. Some of us aren't always prepared to deal with that. And we have to get in our mind space and be able to assist them so that the outcome is positive for everyone, including the parrot. But that's very difficult, and it really weighs heavy on us very often. We often don't allow time for self-care. We don't take time to get away. Our hobbies go by the wayside, and our relationships are very hard to deal with and maintain. We're often alienated from our families and friends and our loved ones who don't understand our desire to make a difference and what that takes from us. Everything we have goes to the parrots. These experiences impact us again and again and can cause a wide range of emotional trauma, as you see here. And guilt, hopelessness, and sadness are very prevalent. Anger can occur as well. So these emotional traumas can cause us physical trauma. So our work is very physical. We are on our feet all day long. We're carrying heavy things. We're constantly bending and kneeling and stretching and walking. And to have the emotional trauma on top of a body that's just really tired, it can wear you down really, really quick. So we deal with regular exhaustion and those emotional and physical traumas on top of it. And if it's not addressed, we can run into more serious issues with compassion fatigue. So that is an emotional exhaustion caused by the stress of dealing with these traumatic and suffering animals. This can often happen very quickly as we deal with so many of these horrible rescues that we see, like BJ or hoarding situations. It can just be more than any one individual can take on. The symptoms of compassion fatigue are listed here, and we often see the reduced feelings of empathy and sensitivity, exhaustion we've talked about, and emotional disconnection. So it's really important that when we do work through these difficult cases, that we are taking the time to address our feelings and working through those. We're very good at compartmentalizing, because when I have one bird that maybe passes away, a very special connection, I still have 799 others that need me that day. So I have to put my feelings aside, and sometimes it's just so busy I could never get back to it. And then one day it hits, and you just have to really make sure we're taking the time to address that. Compassion fatigue and our daily workload can lead to burnout. So this burnout is more a chronic condition that is typically a result of our workload. Working every single day, 10 hours a day, the lack of resources to get that done, and just too much. It's just too much coming in at us all at once. And so burnout can take a lot longer to recover from. And I think Laura Kim mentioned once she had to take 10 years off. That may be what it needs for some people. But if you're feeling or seeing these symptoms with people you work with, it's good to try and address it early so we don't get to the point where we can't help birds down the road. But all these things are very real for us. And I think Netta, in her opening talk, you saw her passion and heard what she had to deal with. That's exactly what I'm talking about here.
Excuse me, Janet, I'm gonna have to ask you to wrap up.
Okay.
We're running long.
So I'm almost done. So I want to revisit BJ just for a second. So BJ was a very special parrot to us, obviously, and his mistrust in humans was immense. It took him 13 years to allow a human to touch him, and we gave him that 13 years. So those are the moments that give us the will to continue and the warmth in our hearts to help another parrot in need. So BJ passed away. He had his mate, Pele, who he had bonded with just 3 years before, by his side. And all of us, of course, honored to be his champion. And although he found a sliver of happiness in captivity, we can't, how can anyone say his captive life was acceptable? We must address the parrot crisis now and stop the trade. Those of us here now know in our lifetimes, millions of parrots will still be captive and will need to be supported. And although BJ didn't have the choice to live his life wild, many have been saved from the suffering of captive life, from the hard work and struggles of many of you here with us today. We thank you seriously for that. I think we all agree this should have been BJ's life, living wild. We hope that today you will commit to action and step up for the parrots to end the parrot crisis. I'm sorry. We can help rescues and sanctuaries through this crisis by educating your network, promoting in-home adoptions, foster, even home sanctuary as Foster Parrots does. And just as important, give your rescue and sanctuary individuals support with a hug, a kind word, or a helping hand. So we know our road is very long and we need your help today. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. You know, I need to take a second here. Yeah, you have a lot of us in tears. So those who have raised their hands, we're asking you to please put your questions in the chat. We have one more person who's going to kind of tie everything she's heard together, and we'd like to welcome back Dr. Lori Gruen. Go ahead, Lori.
Thanks. I'm just going to be very brief. This is such a powerful set of ways of understanding how difficult the parrot crisis is for human beings. Hector's stories were just incredible. Irene's facing such difficulty with prejudice towards the sort of megafauna in Africa. And of course, Janet's stories were just really heart-wrenching. And there's so much sadness and so much horror. I think it's really important to think about, again, ways to build bridges with organizations that can potentially be allies and helpful. Human rights organizations, for example, haven't spent enough energy thinking about and protecting eco-defenders and animal protectors. And those of us who have connections to the human rights organizations that have done remarkable work for refugees and other humans that are facing crises across various political, economic, and conditions have to be pushed to think about the environment and to think about those people who, as Hector told us, are being actually killed to protect the forests and to protect their environments. So I think that's a set of organizations that might be very useful. I was really pleased to know that the Jane Goodall Foundation in just this year has worked very hard to try to bridge from great apes to also do some work to promote the concerns of the gray parrots in Africa. So that's another way to go. Yesterday we talked about pushing against the airlines and People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, for all their difficulties, have been really successful in getting airlines to agree to, almost nearly every major airline has agreed not to ship monkeys. So this is another place to start building connections between those that are doing work for animals or for humans or for the environment. We could talk about compassionate conservation, but I want to be brief, and some of you are very well versed in that. The other thing I just wanted to say is that there's a lot of important ways in which, for those on the front line, sanctuary workers in particular, there really is, even though there's so much pressure and so much time, there's an absolute need to take care of one another, to figure out creative healing rituals, and to engage in self-care. These are three really important ways of being able to continue to be present for the parents that we care about. I also just want to mention an older book written by a sanctuary founder who doesn't work with parrots, but did have 2 parrots and now 1 there at the sanctuary. Patrice Jones at Vine Sanctuary wrote a wonderful book called Aftershock, which addresses this concern about burnout and about how to deal with the great horrors that we're all carrying in the face of such violence and such cruelty and death.